Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. That's a statement that serves as the primary theological confession of the Old Testament. It's found in Deuteronomy 6:4. It's a confession that serves as the theological keystone of the first three commandments: to have no other gods, make no idols, and to not bear the Lord's name in vain. It's a confession that the Lord, Yahweh, this God who has revealed himself, who has entered into covenant, has taken the initiative to create that covenant relationship. He is our God. He's our God. This is what he has done for us. Our allegiance is to him supremely. And it is so because he is our God and because he is one. Not only are we monotheists, rejecting the slew of all the options out there, the whole pantheon of gods present throughout history, but we declare that Yahweh is God alone. He alone is God. Only he can truly be declared as God. He is the one God, the one true God. And if we are to take up this confession, if we were to bear this confession, not just on our lips, but in our lives, if that were to be true of us, then there is only one way to live. There's only one option before us. It is to love this God, our God, the one God, to love him, to love the Lord with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. That is the only option before us. If this is who God is, that is the only right response before us. We ought to love him supremely with our whole being. And this, friends, this is what Paul is aiming to drive deeply home into our minds and into our souls in our passage this morning. That is what he has in view right here as we come back to 1 Corinthians. Now you might be thinking, well, hold on a second, that doesn't seem to be what Paul is getting at here. I mean, right? He introduces another church problem for us. This is what he's focused on: the food offered to idols. Now, you'll remember, it'll come as no surprise that there's another problem going on in the church of Corinth. We've seen this is what Paul is doing throughout this letter, taking a smattering of church problems and bringing to bear the gospel solution. And so we've seen him bring that good news of the gospel to address divisions and infighting and sexuality and lawsuits and marriage and divorce. He looks upon each of these pain points in the life of this local church, and he brings the good news of Christ and him crucified to bear in that particular situation. His gospel fluency is most evident throughout this letter. He is, time and time again, bringing attention to the transformative effect of being profoundly and eternally united with Christ. Being so united to Jesus, it changes everything. And so indeed, we are following Christ in all of life. And so Paul here, he does turn his attention to the problem of food offered to idols. Clearly a situation that would have been present in the ancient world, with all of the Roman deities and the worship of Caesar as a god, as the Lord, as he was known. And yet, I think as we look at these 6 verses, so we're coming to this new church problem, that's not really what Paul is driving at to start. He actually moves in a little bit of a different direction. I think he's actually, in these 6 verses, less concerned with just a simple directive of what to eat or not to eat, to visit a temple or to not visit a temple. Right? That's what we want. I'm sure the Christians at Corinth would have appreciated that if it was just a letter of simple dictates that makes it easy. So just do this, okay? You've got all these questions, just do this. Or don't do these things. That makes life simple. But that's not what Paul does. That's not what he's after. It's not actually a better way. His greater concern, I think, in our passage here before us, is addressing the question of how should Christians engage with a culture that is shaped by a starkly distinct religious milieu. How do we engage with a culture that is worshiping other gods? What does that look like? How do we persevere and endure in faithfulness to Christ when all around us, day by day, in the marketplace, at work, everywhere we go, it's all shaped and saturated with the worship of other gods? What are we to do in such a place like that? And that question, it isn't answered chiefly by addressing the issue of food and idolatry. So I think what we see here is that Paul is reframing the problem in verses 1 through 3, and then he's giving the reorienting principle in verses 4 through 6. All right, so he's starting here to kind of take an issue that's going on there in Corinth and then leading the Corinthians to step back for a second and say, we need to see the bigger picture here. We need to understand something much more profound than just simply answering your question of, can I do this or not? And he's going to get to that specific topic, and God willing, that's where we'll go next week. How do we take the application of verses 1 through 6 and bring it to bear now on this particular issue of food offered to idols? Right? That's, God willing, where we'll go next week as Paul drills down on that topic in verses 7 through the end of the chapter, verse 13. All right, so I think what Paul is doing here, like what he is saying in these 6 verses, is that it is more foundational. It is more foundational for you to know that you are known by God. You are known by God, from whom and for whom and through whom and in whom are all things. That's mainly what you need to know. That's mainly what needs to seep down into your soul, is that you are known by God, from whom and for whom and through whom and in whom are all things. This is the God who knows you. We so often fixate on the issue at hand, just this one little thing. This is where the pain points is. This is where the stress is. This is where the rub is. I need to get this resolved. Right? We can fixate on that issue at hand, when in fact, doing that, focusing just right there, that might relieve the immediate question, the immediate burden, but it doesn't do enough. We need to go deeper. We need to go broader to alleviate the problem. What we need is the reorientation of a thorough, robust perspective on the world that sees it rightly, that we have a right framework and understanding of this world, that the triune God revealed in the Scriptures, He is the source and means by which all exists. Everything we do, every interaction that we have, every transaction that we make, every relationship that we foster, all of it needs to be brought into conformity and submitted to the reality that the triune God revealed here in the Scriptures is the source and means by which all exists. When we do that, we're thinking like the apostle. When we do that, we find real knowledge. We gain real freedom. We enjoy real belonging. We possess real identity. We foster real worship. As we recognize that we are known by this God. And so if we're going to get there, if if we're going to have such a robust outlook on the world, submitted to the supreme lordship of the triune God over all, if we're going to get there, we got to start first with a reframing of the problem. And so we look at verses 1 through 3, a reframing of the problem. We've seen before, already in the first 7 chapters of this letter, that Paul, he will often make use of some slogans that are present there in Corinth, indicating to us that this really isn't actually 1 Corinthians. There's been other communication between the apostle and the church, right? That he's been either receiving word by way of messengers, or they've sent communication by a letter, and it seems as though he's quoting back to them some of these kind of buzzword things that they're saying, some of these ideas and concepts and phrases that they're using in order for him to speak poignantly to the issue at hand. That's what's going on there in Corinth. And I think, again, we see that here in our passage. And as he does so here, I think he's in agreement, in part, with what the Corinthians are saying. He draws differing conclusions, but he agrees with the key sentiment of what they've been saying. And so, yes, all of us Christians, we all possess knowledge about Christ and the gospel, about the supremacy of Christ testified to in his resurrection. And yet we know there is something else going on with this Corinthian knowledge, right? That Paul isn't just given a hearty endorsement of what it is that they've been saying, that there's something defective here going on with their knowledge. We see that for 2 reasons. One, because Paul says that it's a source of pride. This knowledge is broken or defective. It isn't a good, healthy, commendable knowledge that they have, because it is a source of pride. It puffs up. See verse 2, that such claims to knowledge that they're actually uninformed. They don't know as they really ought to know. So things are not so simplistic. There is more to know. And the Corinthians apparently were asserting a casualness of some kind, a flippancy with idolatry since Jesus is Lord. That seems to be kind of what was going on in Corinth as it relates to idolatry. The logic that they seem to be operating under is that, well, if Jesus is Lord, if Jesus reigns over all, then it just doesn't matter what you do with idolatry and temples and food, right? Like, they're not gods. That's just a building. Well, that's just meat, right? If Jesus is Lord and he rules and reigns over all, then this other stuff, it just doesn't really matter. I think Paul's saying, yeah, kinda. Like, yeah, I agree with you. Yes, Jesus is Lord. He rules and reigns over all, but how you interact with these other things, it does matter. It does matter. And how you're doing it, Corinthians, it's not how you should be doing it. Right? So the primary issue that Paul first addresses, it's not the food offered to idols rooted in this misguided knowledge. Right? The issue is reframed by the apostle to be about the right worship of God in all of life. Like, this is what you need to understand. Here's your presenting problem, food offered to idols. But really, your problem is how you understand the right worship of God in all of life. Because that's going to have a trickle-down effect on how you understand your interaction with the things related to idolatry. But to understand right worship, well, we need to understand what false worship is. And I wonder if you kids could help me out with this one. All right? Kids, how many of you have used a catechism, whether at home or at school? Anyone using a catechism? Some of you? All right. I wonder if you've come across this question before. What is idolatry? Have you heard that in the catechism that you've used? I know which catechism some of you are using. Do you know it? What is idolatry? Cadence, you want to say it? No? All right. Well, here's the answer from one catechism. I think it's Heidelberg. I saw it in the New City Catechism, which combines some other good questions and resources. What is idolatry? The Catechism answers it this way. Idolatry is trusting in a created thing rather than the Creator for our hope and happiness, our significance and security. Did you catch that? Idolatry is trusting in a created thing rather than the Creator for our hope and our happiness, our significance and our security. That's what idolatry is. Or I think you could put it another way. Idolatry is putting created things over the Creator, valuing created things more than the Creator in worth or in our affections, or kind of leaning on that affection kind of language. You could think of it this way. Idolatry is loving created things more than the Creator. And Paul is making the point that what we do in order to address this topic of food offered to idols, we need to get to the nitty-gritty answer of that issue. But first, we need to rightly order our affections. We got to get everything in proper alignment. That if we are prone to idolatry of loving created things, whether other beings or other substances, items, toys, food, if we're loving any created thing more than the Creator, our affections are askew, they're out of line, and we need our affections to be rightly ordered, that we love the Lord our God with all our heart and with all our soul and with all our strength. And it is that language of affection that Paul uses in verse 3. Look here at verse 3. If anyone loves God, he has been known by God. So the problem going on here is that they think that they have knowledge which has led them to have an exaggerated self-conception. So one resource described this sense of them being puffed up. They have an exaggerated self-conception. It's a problem. A problem is that they think that they know something about God, that they are so well informed, so well educated about the Lord and about divine things, that when instead they should give greater attention to what it is that they love. They focus so much on what they know. Well, what is it that you love? What do you esteem as worthy? That's what you need to give greater thought to, Corinthians. Are they living according to love for God or a love for the social standing that comes along by associating with the cultural elites and their pagan practices? Which one has a greater shaping force on their life? Which love is defining them? Have they affirmed faith in God alone, but then turned to fail and not love Him with all their heart, soul, and might? They need their problem reframed to see the truly remarkable thing is not that they know something of God, but rather that they have been known by God. It's not about them. It's not about what they've come to know and how it is that they've been puffed up and the things that they can do. They need to reckon with the reality that they have been known by God. You see this in verse 3? This if-then statement, the ESV doesn't capture the then, but it's there in the logic. If anyone loves God, then he has been known by God. Now, even I state that a little bit different than what's recorded here. Paul, he writes with a perfect tense verb. All right, getting back to school, get back to grammar. Perfect tense verbs. These are important. Grammar matters. And that perfect tense doesn't quite get conveyed here in verse 3 with the ESV, where it just conveys it as a present reality. He is known by God. But what Paul is communicating is that if you love God, if that is true of you, well, there's something that is true before that. If you love God, that is evidence that that you have been loved, or excuse me, you have been known by God. There's this prior activity that the Lord has taken the initiative to bring about. He has known you. He has known you in the past, and he goes on knowing you. This is the ongoing reality of your existence. This God, he has set his awareness, right? He's not just talking like cognitive awareness. He knows, he has known you existed, and you go on existing, and he knows that to be true, right? That's not what Paul's meaning when he's talking about knowledge. He's kind of twisting, making a little play on words here as he's talking about knowledge, right? They think that they know empirical truths about the way of walking with Christ. And he said, well, God knows you, but in a much richer way than just empirical knowledge. He knows you covenantally. He knows you because he set his affection on you. He chose you. He predestined you to adoption. Right? He knows you in that relational kind of a way. He knows you in the context of a covenant. The Corinthians, they have a problem with their knowledge, whereas the really remarkable thing is that they have been covenantally known by the Creator and King. And no idol will ever do that. No idol will ever know you in that relational kind of a way. Not Baal, not Caesar, not Allah, not even self. No idol will know you in the way that God knows his people. No idol can covenantally know you for your eternal good because no idol is God. So friends, you must pursue a recalibration of your affections, of your love. Don't have a flippant relationship with created things that allure you to trust in them, to esteem them, to value them over and against the Creator. Retirement savings will promise hope. Sexual expression will promise happiness. Motherhood will promise significance. Promotions will promise security, and not one of them will make good on those promises. They will fail you. They will come up short. They cannot cash that check. Such created things cannot actually deliver to provide the hope and happiness, security and safety that you desire, that you were created with. They can't. Only the Creator can. And because you have been known by God, church, love him with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. That is the right response. Because you have been known by the Lord, then don't go and sell your heart out to such lesser things. Love him supremely. But how? When these created things have such a tentacled grip on our hearts. How do we do that? How do we start peeling away these tentacles that are just so ingrained into who we are and the fabric of our being and how we think and how we operate, and we don't even necessarily control it. Which is like, I just want what I want because I want it. This is where 19th century pastors, helpful. It's not always the solution. It can sometimes seem that way as we talk. But Thomas Chalmers, in his sermon called The Expulsive Power of a New Affection, he provides great help and insight as to how it is that we pull back those tentacles from their grip, as enmeshed and entangled as they are with our affections. He offers, there's two ways that you can go about it, of moving away from a desire and a love and an esteem, a worship, in fact, of lesser things. You can look at the lesser thing and just pick apart why it is inferior. You can take that kind of logical, analytical approach. That is a lesser thing because of X, Y, and Z. Or you can go another way, and the other way really is the only way. That first way, it's not going to deal decisively with that lesser thing. What you have to do is you have to find something better. You have to find something that is of greater worth, of greater value, worthy of more worship. And when you do, when you find something so much more satisfying than that lesser thing, that greater thing will expel. It will expel that lesser desire. Right? This is what he means by this phrase, an expulsive. It's not explosive, expulsive, expel, right? You tracking? You're expelling that lesser thing by the power of a new affection. You have found something far greater. Right? So just thinking how this works, it works in all kinds of ways, but just pretty corporeally, right? Like, you're single. This is all off the fly now, so we'll see where this is going. You're single. A lot of ladies out there, right? In college, right? Target-rich environment. Wow, lots of godly young women to go and pursue, right? And you can find a desire in lots of them, right? But then comes along the one. It's like, wow, she's beautiful. I want to make her my wife, right? That greater affection, that greater desire expels that lesser desire of all these other things. Or maybe a more mundane example. You love Costco vanilla ice cream. Right? Maybe you love it too much. It is inordinately good. Right? How are you going to prevent yourself from loving it too much? Well, you could say, well, look at the fat content and the sugar and et cetera, et cetera. Right? You could look analytically at it, or you say, I got to find something better. Right? I get home from work in the evening, and that is where I turn. It is a comfort to my body, and it feels like a comfort to my soul. Right? You expel that lesser affection by something greater, something better. And you turn ultimately to the Lord to say, oh God, how I behold you in your word, how rich and sweet and beautiful you are, far better than a bowl of Costco vanilla ice cream. Right? This is the expulsive power of a new affection. You find something better, something more satisfying. And knowing this God revealed here in Scripture, even in 1 Corinthians 8, knowing this God, he is the one who has known you. That is the avenue to the right worship of the triune God in all of life. Beholding him as he is, that's how we cultivate love for the Lord and expel these lesser idolatrous desires that we have. And that is the reorienting principle. That's the reorienting principle of verses 4 through 6. Know this God, truly know him according to the splendor of his holiness. Know him as he's revealed himself, yes, in this world, but especially in his word. And when you do, the empty promises of the idols of your heart will be as ash. And they fly away. They'll be like nothing when you see and behold this God. And that's what Paul aims to do in verses 4 through 6. He starts off, yes, in verses 4 and 5, agreeing in principle, again, with the theological assertions of the Corinthians. He's saying, yes, an idol has no real existence and that there is no God but one. He's affirming that. The carved images and statues that were found pervasively throughout Corinth and the Mediterranean world of the first century, they are just wood and stone and precious metals. Right? These idols, these things, they are nothing. Right? They are, in fact, so-called gods, right? As he says in verse 6. Right? They are, verse 5, they are so-called gods. But we'll see when we get to chapter 10, as he continues in this section, from 8 through chapter 10, is that these beings, right, these so-called gods, they actually are demons. They're demons. That's what stands behind the idols that the nations worship. They are called gods. They are called lords. But in reality, there is no God but one. They are not really gods. Right? So the Corinthians, they have the keystone affirmation of Deuteronomy 6:4 down. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. But do they really know this God like they think they do? One theologian, commenting on verse 6, says that this verse is one of the greatest pioneering moments in the entire history of Christology. One of the greatest pioneering moments in the entire history of Christology. Paul takes that bedrock confession from Deuteronomy, the Shema as it's known. Right? He takes that statement, he's reading Deuteronomy, and he boldly asserts that Jesus is very God of very God. This God that Moses beheld, through whom his writings and his prophetic ministry revealed, this God is Jesus. So don't be misguided here as you look at verse 6 of this phrase, yet for us, when you get tripped up there and think that Paul is saying something akin to, well, this is my truth, or this is our truth, right? In our community, like this is what we believe, right? They believe something else, we believe this. That's not what he's saying, right? Paul hasn't bought into the self-exalting idolatry of relativism. He's saying that people generally call these gods and lords, but for us, for Christians who have been known by God, by the one true God, we who know the truth, we know that there is one God and one Lord. Do you know him? That's Paul's point. There is one God and one Lord. Do you know him? There is one God, the Father, from whom are all things and for whom we exist. God the Father is God in the prime. He is the fount of life. All exists from him and to him. Right? Again, the grammar is of utmost importance. The prepositions that Paul is using here conveys insurmountable truths. All that exists is from God and unto God, or as the ESV captures it, for God. There is a beginning and there is an end. There is a creator who had a purpose in view. He has a telos. It's not just setting things in motion and then we'll just see where it goes. No, God, the Father, he is the one from whom all exists. He is the source of all that we behold, and he did so with great intentionality. All that exists for him. It is going somewhere. There is a trajectory in history from the very moment of creation until the consummation of history and the new creation comes. It's all moving somewhere, and it is moving to that very destination of the glory of the Father. That's why he created. That is his goal. He is the Alpha and the Omega. He is the beginning and the end. And as such, we see most plainly that he is the Lord. He is the one who causes all things to be. Nothing happens apart from him. There is nothing in all creation that exerts its will or finds its existence by mere chance or exerting its will apart from his sovereign purposes. All exists from him and to him. And this God who rules and reigns over all, who initiated and will consummate all of creation, Paul is chiefly concerned here to convey him to us as God has revealed himself that he is Father. He's Father. Right? That is conveying and imparting to us that God, we do not relate to him merely in a relationship of sheer obedience. Right? It's not just submission. That's not how we interact with God. He is Father. He is Father. He cares for his creation. He tends to it, and yes, he even disciplines and corrects because, oh, how good a Father he is. This God, there is none before him. None before him in time, being, glory, holiness, or splendor. He is the Creator who by the very word of his power brought into existence all that is. Do you know him? And there is one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom are all things and through whom we exist. Jesus is the Lord, the Messiah, the Christ. He is the anointed one. He is the King of kings and the supreme sovereign over all creation. And so it's unthinkable to say in earnest that I made Jesus Lord of my life. No, you did not. He is Lord over all. You did nothing. You are dust. You are here today and gone tomorrow. Do not think so highly of yourself. You're giving yourself to the same kind of puffing up knowledge that the Corinthians did. He is Lord over all, and what you think of him does not change that in the slightest. But oh, how we know that every knee will bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth. That is coming. One day, when Christ returns, all will be revealed to be under submission to him. But praise be to God, that is not a fearful day for us who so hope in this Lord, in this Messiah. No, because it is through him that we exist. It is through him that all things are. Right? That's why Jesus is the Word. He is the agency of the Father. He was there in the beginning with God, who was God. He is the very means of creation, that just as the Father spoke and it was, so Jesus is the one who has eternally proceeded from the Father. And he is the one sent by the Father to come and accomplish redemption. So indeed, all things were made through him. All things find their being in him. There is nothing that was made that was not made apart from him. And he is the very radiance, right? Think of sun rays beaming forth from the source, the sun. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. Do you know him? Or better yet, have you been known by him? Have you been known by him? Do you see how this is reorienting us? Reframing the problem. It's not just about food. It's not just about idolatry. It's not even just about being more like Corinth than Christ. If your understanding and perspective of the world is informed and shaped by a full-throated declaration that Jesus, our God, Jesus is one, it changes everything. It changes everything. You likely are not tempted to offer a sacrifice to Mother Earth. Maybe you've got neighbors. Maybe they've partaken in such things. You probably aren't tempted to burn incense to Biden. Maybe based on friends' social media, that's what it seems like they do. Maybe that's not what allures you. But a beckoning idol is likely much closer. Because I think underneath the love of money, and the desire for the praise of others, and the affirmation of success, is the yearning to exalt self. To exalt self. Oh, how you and I, we want what we want, and we want it when we want it. Our whole frame of reference is about me. I want a wife who meets every one of my needs. I want a husband who satisfies my every emotional whim. I want a job that makes me feel important. I want a child that gives me significance. I want a drink that makes me feel better. I want to waste my nights away gaming so I don't have to bear the stress. We long to reach out our hand and take and eat that we might be like God. And we yearn to be known and made much of. So, church, don't set your sights so low. Don't set your sights so low. The acclaim and approval and praise of a few decades in this life. It is nothing. It is nothing in comparison to having been known by the one God, the Father, and one Lord, Jesus Christ. He is altogether more desirable, more lovely, more knowing in a deeper way, in delivering on exceedingly better promises. And so as we come to the table this morning, consider, is it not a defining and remarkable feature of the Christian life that this is not a table with food that we offered in sacrifice? What did you do to partake of this table? Nothing. And obviously, bread and the cup, these things, they did not just descend from the heavens. They are purchased at a store. So you could probably squirrel away some way of saying, oh yeah, I contributed something. Right? That's not the point. Our acceptance before our God is not based on the value or sufficiency of the sacrifice that we make. Our acceptance is not based on how holy we have maintained our lives leading up to coming to this table. Our acceptance is not based on how completely and perfectly we have repented of our sin. And we commune with God at this table based solely on the sacrifice provided for us, Jesus Christ, through whom are all things and through whom we exist. So, church, take up this confession and love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might, because you have been known by God.